Sarika Khanwilkar, today's guest, is a graduate student at Columbia University and the founder of Wild Tiger, a nonprofit supporting efforts to protect tigers in India. She explains how protecting people and the planet also helps tigers. She'll also share insights about her superpower, thinking outside the box as a scientist. I'm your host, Devin Thorpe. Welcome to the Superpowers for Good show. Sarika, I am so excited to talk to you today. You know, I've known your dad probably since you were born, and when he posted on LinkedIn a link to some of the research and work that you're doing with tigers, I was like, oh, we got to get Sarika on the show. So welcome and thank you so much for joining us.
Well, thank you for having me. Those words are very flattering, and it's really exciting to see interest in the research that I'm doing.
Yeah, well, it is just it's just a thrill for me to connect with you, and I love your study of evolutionary biology there and ecology at Columbia. I think that's such an important field, and so I'm excited about that. But I want to focus our conversation on your work with tigers. You've set up this nonprofit now that you're running to help preserve and protect tigers in India. And what a challenge. Tell us a little bit about how this came about.
Yeah, of course. I think knowing the story behind, what's a small tiger conservation organization doing in the U.S. When all the tigers are actually halfway around the world. I think I love the chance to share the story and tell people why tigers mean so much to me and sort of the work that Wild Tiger is doing. So I guess it started out actually sort of as with smaller goals in mind. I started this organization in 2015, and that was after I went on my first sort of professional trip to India. I had actually been traveling to India since I was a child because my dad is from there, but that was mostly as a tourist and to visit relatives. And when I visited after I got my undergraduate degree in biology, I came with a totally different perspective. And I went to rural India and I saw tigers, but I also, most importantly, I saw how people are living with tigers and the challenges that come along with that. And those challenges had been missing from a lot of the narrative that us in the United States have about tiger conservation. For a very oversimplistic narrative that a lot of us are given are that, we have to increase tiger numbers to save them. But it's just a lot more complicated than that. So I got really interested in just tiger conservation in central India in particular. And what I was seeing on the ground when I went there was really impactful work happening by locally led small organizations. So these aren't your bingos, your big international non-governmental organizations that everyone's heard of. These are small organizations that hardly have the funds to pay their staff, let alone market themselves or have like a really good website. So these locally run organizations were doing amazing work with communities, with tigers, with wildlife. And I thought like, wow, like these people need support. And so that's actually kind of why Wild Tiger was born. It was born out of the idea of, let me just financially support these organizations by raising money in the United States and giving it to the organizations that I know are doing really good work. And then also scientific support. So when I was able to go over to India after that initial time visit, I would go when I could and provide scientific support. So help in data collection, help a lot in data analysis, and figuring out from like a scientific perspective whether sort of certain interventions were working or just like measuring progress of certain things. So that's kind of how it began, and it's sort of transformed and evolved a little since then.
Oh, fantastic. This is such important work. The tigers are so endangered, aren't they? I think they're just terribly threatened. You mentioned that it's much more complicated than just increasing the numbers. Help us understand, what are the issues? And I think you're thinking about that, at least in part, as a scientist. What are the issues you see?
Yeah, so I mean, one of the issues, I'll tell you about the first person I ever met who actually lived with tigers. What I mean by that is in a village that's near forest, where tigers live in India. And I visited this man whose wife had died, who had been mauled by a tiger while out collecting firewood. So a horrible tragedy. Um, just having a community member die and be lost from the community, and also we were finding that that's just one sort of person that I met, but it was a pattern that we were finding, that were certain um, livelihood patterns, you could say, such as collecting firewood, which increased the risk of people getting attacked by tigers or leopards. And so, and then I got interested in firewood collection, right? Sort of like, well, why are these women and children, it is mostly women and children who are burdened with collecting firewood and cooking at home. It is mostly those people who are outgoing collecting firewood. I started wondering, well, why? Because, I'm a biologist. I was always focused on the wildlife, but then I started getting more interested in the people. And then I learned more about, from a more development perspective, about energy access and cooking fuel. And so, they were gathering this firewood for cooking fuel. And so you can't, sort of, if you don't know why people are collecting firewood, you can just say, well, just have them stop collecting firewood and they won't be in the risk of being attacked by a tiger or a leopard. But it's
Just
not
like
that
saying,
simple.
just ask them to stop eating, right?
Yeah, exactly. It's one of the essential parts of being human and an animal is needing food, and so you can't tell them to stop. To stop cooking food. So, so all of a sudden you have this wicked problem where not only, you're connected to tigers and sort of the conservation sphere, but then all of a sudden you're also connected to the more development sphere of like, how can we like improve these people's lives so they aren't depending on the forest and so they aren't risking their lives to get attacked by tigers. That's firewood collection. It was one very sort of one example of the many ways that this is complicated. And the same thing with toilets. People in these communities, they relieve themselves outside. And again, when you're out bending down, tigers, you become the sort of the level of the prey. And that's the same thing when people are bending over getting firewood, actually, as well. So that again puts them at risk of getting attacked by tigers and leopards. And again, like access to you know clean bathrooms is just a global poverty problem, right? And so these sort of like all of these problems are very intertwined. And I think in that sense, that's why tiger conservation is not just about saving tigers, particularly in the central Indian landscape. Um, Even though tigers are found across, there are 13 tiger range countries, but India does hold a majority of the global tiger population. And there's a lot of this sort of human wildlife dimensions going on.
Yeah, I can only imagine with India's huge population how these human tiger interactions are happening all the time. And so looking for systemic ways to reduce those enables them. Because I imagine, you tell me, but when someone is hurt by a tiger, uh, people react, I imagine, negatively. And they want to get revenge on the tiger. Isn't that one of the natural things? And doesn't that and then threaten the life of the tiger as well?
So it's kind of that certainly is one of the things that can happen, um, but that's not the thing that happens all the time. One of the reasons tigers have been able to survive in India so long is because people have had a great tolerance for this conflict. And part of that comes from the religious um, symbolism of animals itself and the tiger. The tiger is a god. And so, when I go into the landscape where there is a lot of conflict, I will see temples with a tiger figurine, sort of like where a human life was taken. And so they both it's both a fear and a reverence, sort of interesting, sort of tolerance and respect going on, I would say. But because things are changing, in India, actually, tiger populations are increasing a bit. So you have more movement, et cetera. So things are changing. And so tolerance changes. And so then you do, I think, get more of this sort of like negative reaction of just let's get revenge on the tiger. But certainly it's just not easy to live with
Yeah.
tigers.
So as you think about these complexities, and you've identified two, the lack of toilets and cooking with firewood. What are the NGOs that you're working with doing to address those problems? I imagine you raise those issues in part because NGOs you are partnered with are doing something, but maybe I misread the situation.
Yeah, completely. Actually, one of the organizations that really actually jump started my career and who I continually work with, Tiger Research and Conservation Trust, they do a lot of work mitigating human wildlife conflict. It actually they started with sort of empowering the community with knowledge about what puts you at risk for being attacked, and sort of created these community teams within each village to actually monitor around the village for tiger movement, and so to sort of alert the village when there was movement around. And then that has over the last 5 years, that has also transformed into more of this livelihoods development sort of sphere. So they are working in communities and helping them, providing LPG connections. LPG is liquefied petroleum gas, sort of an alternative to firewood. Just generally helping develop the community in sort of different ways. So that's certainly one thing.
Fantastic.
Another is just sorry, to continue. Another sort of aspect of all of this, I didn't really talk about it directly, is just livelihood options in general, and so are extremely lacking. A lot of these people are dependent on agriculture or daily wage jobs. There's just not a lot of opportunity in these areas. And so just creating livelihood opportunities is really important. And so one of the other organizations that I work with, Last Wilderness Foundation, they work really closely with indigenous communities mainly to create livelihoods. So they have a jewelry making thing, enterprise, and they also sort of train indigenous people to lead tourist groups through the forest.
No, that's fantastic. It is so interesting to think about the fundamental approach here for protecting, preserving, cultivating tiger populations in India is to help people. Uh, and that connection isn't obvious to those of us who don't encounter tigers very often in the wild here in the United States. So fascinating work. I commend you for stepping up. I'm excited to see the work that you're doing and the difference you're making. Obviously, you're nearly done with your PhD at Columbia. You are a wicked smart human being. Um, I know how much work that is to do a PhD. To think that you have also done uh, you're running a nonprofit at the same time, just double, triple kudos. I wonder, as you look at what you've accomplished over the last 5 years or so, and it is so impressive, what do you see as your superpower?
Yeah, I think my superpower is being a scientist, but thinking beyond that label as a box. Um, to me, I think scientists have been so defined by society, um, as I mean, first off, as a white male, and as somebody who just publishes in peer review publications. Um, and that's basically it. Get funding, publish, and that's sort of the cycle. That's the life cycle of a scientist. Um, but that's just so far beyond, I think, what scientists should do and can do. And so, like right now, our society is so sort of like mistrusting of science, as in general. And so I think, as a scientist, that's a little, that's kind of a bummer. And so to me, I think creating, like having scientists communicate directly with the public and be more of public figures and public leaders, in life in general, would be nice. I mean, can you imagine, a scientist as popular as like Kim Kardashian? People are like wondering, like, what is their perspective on this new paper that came out? I mean, like making science cool again, basically. And so I think just allowing scientists to be more creative in how they express their knowledge, is something I'm interested in. And then also, what I'm really passionate about is doing better science. And what I mean by that is not only sort of allowing more diverse perspectives to do science, that is to study and to pursue it as a career and actually become scientists, but also like when we're doing science, I think we need to be like a lot more cognizant of how we're impacting the people that we're collecting data on, or the people who own the land where we are collecting data from, um, and then the impact of our data beyond that peer review publication. Like if your results does have policy implications, are those policy changes going to be seen through, or are those just like empty words on a paper? So to me, I just think that scientists, we have a responsibility because of our almost. I mean, I think a while ago I learned about how people are very trusting of scientists, actually, which is interesting because there's like a mistrust of science. But anyways, there's a general like trust of overall of a person who is a scientist, and so like using that privilege that we have, to our advantage to actually like benefit society through the knowledge of the science, and also through actually like changing the world with our science, like seeing those changes through. Yeah, just because too many times I think the papers just sit in a journal, um, and they have really great recommendations, but nothing like ever happens to them. I mean, like I'm just immediately thinking of the COVID-19 pandemic. I mean, there were like several peer review publications that said this was happening, this was going to happen. Yeah,
Yeah.
you know.
Yeah, it's such a great point that you're making, such a great superpower you're identifying, this idea of doing science better, not being constrained by the box. I think that's really a powerful thing, and you're really manifesting that effectively with your work with the tigers, right? You've already stepped up. You didn't wait to get your PhD. You didn't wait till life was easy or you were already rich. You said, "Let's get going on this now." Very impressive. I wonder, as you think about how you might coach others who are in the science field, and I want you not just to think about someone like you 5 years ago, or someone who's starting a PhD. I want you to think about uh, speaking to your PI, think about speaking to people who are in positions of authority how, and power. And take just a minute, maybe, to speak truth to power and tell us how you would coach them to use these principles, to adopt this worldview of using science deliberately and proactively to do good.
Wow. Well, I think the number one thing I would ask people is to commit to their study population or study area. You don't have to be monogamous, but commit to that place. I mean, I think a lot of scientists, I hear, they'll do what they did in their older scientists, what they did in their PhD is completely different from what they end up doing. And that can be true, but I don't know. I think there's some value to like even starting out, even if when you don't really know what's going to happen in the future, like starting out as a PhD, there's a value to like really just committing yourself to a place and seeing positive change through somewhere. And so just, commit to places, have some place-based research going on and work would be great. And I guess another thing would take the 1 to 2 years plus that it takes to create and build relationships with local people and local governments before you even start data collection. So I think like making conversations and genuine collaboration a part of every work would be, I think, really great. And yeah, I think those are the two main things that immediately come to mind.
Oh, that's really powerful insight. Really powerful insight. Well, Sarika, I'm so glad that we had a chance to connect. I'm grateful for all that you've shared with us today. I'm excited about the work you're doing. Before we wrap up, would you take a minute and tell people how they can learn more about you, your nonprofit, how they can connect with you, maybe social media or otherwise? Tell people how they can engage, maybe donate to your efforts.
Yeah, of course. Well, I think the number one way to stay in touch with me is to sign up for my newsletter, for the Wild Tiger newsletter. So go to my website. I'm sure I'll have it sort of below in the description here, but wild-tiger.org. Sign up for the newsletter. And then I'm most active on Instagram. So if you want to get some more like personable communications from me, you can find me on Instagram at Sarika Living Wild.
Fantastic. Well, Sarika, thank you so much for taking the time to be with us today. We wish you every success in your effort to protect and preserve tigers by helping people to prosper.
Yes.
And we wish you every success in that great work.
Thank you so much. It was fabulous to be on here.
All righty. Now let's do some good. Thank you for tuning in to the Superpowers for Good show. Twice each week, we host changemakers who share their impact, insights, and superpowers. Don't miss another episode. Subscribe today at superpowersforgood.com. That's superpowers good.com. Be super empowered. Get your copy of the book, Superpowers for Good, as an ebook, audiobook, paperback, or hardcover edition via your favorite online retailer. Interested in having me speak to your company, organization, or association? Visit devinthorpe.com. Then let's talk. Now, keep using your superpowers for good. Together, we can reverse climate change, improve global health, and eradicate poverty.